Hello and welcome to the PWGC Environmental Echo. I'm your host, Paul Boyce, President and CEO of PW Grocer. And today we've got another interesting topic for our listeners. You may not think it's interesting, but you're going to find out that it really is, and that's the legal perspectives on the environment. And we've got a terrific guest today from Farrell Fritz. We've got a partner at the law firm. It's Christopher Kent from the east end of Long Island. Chris, he started out, as I mentioned, he's a partner at Farrell Fritz, and he focuses his attention on issues related to real estate, land use, municipal law, and zoning law. Prior to joining Farrell Fritz, he served as Suffolk County's Director of Real Property Acquisition and Management, and later on as Chief Deputy County Executive, which I did not know that. That's interesting, Chris. Most recently, Chris has played a key role in the development of solar power installations on Long Island's East End. And again, it was a topic we were just talking about in another recent podcast, solar. He serves on the board of directors for the Hauppauge Industrial Association, the HIA, YMCA of Long Island, and the Long Island Association's Energy Environment Committee. Quite impressive. And also joining me with Chris is one of our senior vice presidents who heads our our engineering unit, Bryan Grogan, PE. I want to thank both of you guys for joining me today. And why don't we just dive right into this topic? Chris, welcome. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
As I said, that's quite an impressive career you've already had, and I'm sure it's going to be more to come out of you. We're looking forward to that. What we'd like to talk about is, as we said, some different legal perspectives on the environment here in the region. And I know you've been involved in real estate on Long Island for a number of years. As I mentioned, we've had the honor of working on a couple of projects with you. But over that time, what are the environmental issues that you believe that really define the region here in Long Island?
Well, in Suffolk County, the biggest issue has been the fact that we live on top of our aquifer. So we are drinking the water that we live upon. So it's really important to control what you do on the surface in order to protect the groundwater and to protect the surface waters, which we're surrounded by. We live on an island.
Mm-hmm.
We're surrounded by the Long Island Sound to the north, the bay to the east, to Peconic Bay, which is completely surrounded by the North Fork and the South Fork. We have the Great South Bay. We have a lot of rivers and creeks that flow into the bays, and then we have the Atlantic Ocean to the south, which is only buffered by the Fire Island. So it's really important that development is conscious of the fact that we live on top of the groundwater and the water that we drink, and develop in a way that protects the groundwater. So the biggest issue that I've been involved with pretty much my entire career, which started in 1981 when I first came out to eastern Long Island, has been sewers. Suffolk County was completely under-sewered. A lot of the wastewater, you would flush your toilets, would go right into cesspools that would leach into the ground without any treatment. And early on, when I was first working on development, there weren't even septic tanks. So you had issues where people were flushing their toilets and the waste would go right into a leaching ring, a cesspool, and would then end up into the groundwater, where the only filtration would be the sandy soil prior to reaching the aquifer. So we've progressed quite a bit since then. When I first came here, the Southwest Sewer District was a project that was underway. Unfortunately, at that time, it was considered a boondoggle. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of negativity about developing a sewer district and a sewage treatment plant. There was a lot of inappropriate things going on between contractors and other people that I don't want to get into, but it left a bad taste in people's mouth. People started questioning whether we could build sewage treatment plants in sewer districts without having any type of corruption. So we did get to that point fairly quickly. People understood that how environmentally important it was to have sewer districts and treatment of wastewater prior to being discharged to ground or discharged to surface waters. And so a lot of development has occurred. More development is required. And the funding, unfortunately, hasn't been as much as it used to be for the development of sewer districts. There used to be a lot of federal funding involved, a lot of state funding involved, and then a very small portion was by the county and the local municipalities. That has changed over the years. So you have the environmental benefits for developing sewer districts and sewage treatment plants weighed against the financial cost, and you don't want to overtax people. Recently, fortunately, the state has put up a lot of money, provided the Suffolk County with a lot of money to develop more sewer districts and more sewage treatment plants because they believe the benefits far outweigh the cost. So, and I agree with that. So as far as private development goes, many of the projects I work on have a sewage treatment plant component to the project. And either they're going to build an on-site sewage treatment plant, what we call a construction of a private sewage treatment plant, or connect to a municipal sewage treatment plant, whether it's the county, one of the county sewer districts, which there are several. Bryan probably knows exactly how many there are off the top of his head.
He could probably drive to everyone in each and every one right now. He knows them that well.
And there's also quite a few towns that have sewer districts. Riverhead was way ahead of its time. They built their sewers back in the 1930s. Greenport has its own sewer district and sewage treatment plant. And some of the other towns, Brookhaven has a couple of plants. But it's very important that we treat our wastewater before we discharge to ground and before we discharge to surface waters, because the impact of discharging untreated waste far out is such a detriment to the environment that it's just more beneficial to spend the money and get the proper treatment before discharging the wastewater.
You brought up some really good points right out of the gate on topics that were really near and dear to PWGC and stuff that we've already had the opportunity to speak about in past podcasts, which I think this is great. It's all tying it together. You brought up the wastewater aspect and Long Island being a sole source aquifer. Everything we do is on top of our incredible resource, our drinking water. And not enough people, I think, truly appreciate that or even really understand what's going on and how it's all related and how, the things we do at the surface can really have an effect on, our future supply of water, well into the future. The sins of the past, it's going to take quite a while to catch up with, not having sewers out here in Suffolk County. And as we've continued to develop, and you mentioned the Southwest Sewer District, and, there was a little bit of political scandal with that and how that really left a bad taste in people's mouths and how we've been so afraid to go back to trying to sewer the county and really make an impact on what we're doing in terms of nitrogen and wastewater and how that's all getting down there. It's just been, an incredible, way to start, and I appreciate that because I couldn't agree with you more as, the groundwater, wastewater, surface water, that being, one of the real germane issues here as far as environmental issues and how it relates to the region as a whole.
Then you get into the areas that really can't be sewered economically.
That's correct.
So then you have to develop, and the county has been out in front of this for a number of years now, coming up with what we call on-site sanitary systems, where you're not connected to any pipe that takes the wastewater off-site. You have to figure out how to best treat it on-site with a small sanitary system that services just that lot. And they also are doing more of, I think they're doing some sanitary systems that might treat multiple lots. Bryan probably knows more about that. But the county has been right out front, and there are systems available. I know we call them IA systems.
Yep, that's correct.
Innovative alternative wastewater systems. And some people are complaining about the cost. And again, I always bring it up to my clients when we're doing a project. It's worth it because the cleanup of something discharged without being treated is going to cost you a lot more than treating your wastewater, your effluent, and discharging it to ground with more surety, with more certainty that it won't cause a problem to the drinking water. It's funny, the people who complain the loudest sometimes about the costs of doing it right are the people who will immediately complain when something goes wrong. So it's better to spend the money, do it right, and hopefully avoid things going bad.
Yeah. Well, and to further that, I know you've worked on with a variety of municipalities on all different types of projects, but some of those clients involved the development of public wastewater infrastructure, and when we just touched on a little bit of some of the obstacles to pushing this stuff through and have those obstacles change since the Southwest Sewer District to today? I mean, what are the hurdles that are preventing us from getting this done? You know, obviously cost is a biggie, but what else is really driving that?
Well, absolutely. I think it has changed. The mindset, there's been enough educational efforts made to provide information to the public that how important it is to protect our sole source aquifer, how important it is to protect our surface waters, our rivers, our streams, so that we can go fishing without worrying about catching a fish that's contaminated. Or we could do other things. You know, you don't want the algal blooms. We've had the brown tide out in Peconic Bay. You have the red tide up in Northport Harbor. There's all sorts of environmental consequences that occur as a result of not respecting your environment. So I think there's been enough education. I think it's gone into the school system, so the people who are coming of age now are much more aware than the people were. You know, I'm 62 years old. I don't mind saying it on a podcast. I mean, 40 years ago when I started doing all of this, it was very difficult. But there are people now, the next generation is very aware, and the generation after that will be even more aware.
What do you think spurred that awareness?
It was effort, really. It was effort by all the environmental organizations that get involved, from the Nature Conservancy and the Peconic Land Trust and the Sierra Club and all these organizations that put out information about not damaging our environment, protecting endangered species, doing things the right way that will not harm the planet that we live on. And I think today's the next generation. I mean, Brian's probably the next generation for me, and then even the next generation after that, I think are completely aware and realize that they don't want to inherit a planet that is that is either in the midst of being destroyed or has already been completely impacted by the prior generations, the development and the advancements made by prior generations. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not criticizing the prior generations, and I'm not criticizing the development and progress that occurred over the last 150 years. I'm just saying that from where we are today, in order to continue the progress, continue the advancement, we can develop strategies and technology and development elements that can protect the planet while advancing development. So, and I definitely believe you can do both. And I'm really a strong advocate from my prior positions going way back to the 1980s for preservation of open space, preservation of farmland, and developing where you should develop. So rather than taking a green site and developing a big project, take a site that's previously been developed and redevelop it with some sense, with some good planning. You can create greater density if you provide connection to sewers, if you provide advanced energy concepts, advanced environmental concepts. You can develop where development belongs and preserve and protect what should be preserved and protected, which is farmland, open space, wetlands, habitat for endangered species. All of that can be done while you develop what should be developed. It takes a little planning, but it's much easier to do it on paper than to build it and try to fix it afterwards.
You can say that again. I mean, we've looked at, you know, if we were able to, as I've said this before, wave a wand and all of a sudden all of Suffolk County is magically sewered overnight, you know. We've already got enough nitrogen in the ground that it's going to take decades for it to fully work its way out and stop being a problem, you know. But there's no time like the present on this to start doing that. And it's just, you know, I see more and more of an appetite to move that forward, you know, politically, just with the residents of Suffolk County. You know, I think that the surge or the tide is it's growing here. Brian, you have anything you want to share on that?
No, so I mean, two things. I mean, one is I think that the younger generation, like myself, and even I look at my kids, are seeing, say, some of the repercussions of what Chris is talking about. You know, the algal blooms, whether it's on Long Island or even in Florida. I mean, you look at the red tides in Florida where, you know, you can't necessarily go outside without getting impacted and you can't breathe. Or you're seeing that, you know, we had that tide a couple of years ago that basically turned everything into pea soup. You had manatees and fish dying in record numbers. You know, I think Florida just changed fishing regulations where it's catch and release only now for certain fish species in areas that are impacted. You're seeing it, and it's impacting quality of life. Like Chris said, there is a cost to it, and you need to do it right. And a lot of the reason people come to Long Island is to enjoy the natural beauty that we have here. So if you're not going to protect the water and the beach that you're going to sit on in the summer, what are you really doing? And then, going back to some of the obstacles that I think we face right now, aside from cost, is space. We look at, and we've been in touch with a number of villages or smaller downtown areas, and Chris can elaborate on some of this, but you look at, Village of Southampton, the town of, the hamlet of Montauk, Hampton Bays. These are areas that are developed, not developed to the max, but developed. And if you're trying to retrofit sewer infrastructure in there, the biggest thing that comes up is, well, where do you put the treatment facility? And 9 times out of 10, it's nowhere near where you're actually trying to sewer. So I think something like that, where you have to take the pre-planning steps and, work with those municipalities on where do they own property, where, make sure they maintain that property. They don't sell it off for, budgetary reasons or otherwise. Or work with a developer that's willing to oversize a treatment plant that's going in near town or something like that, and make a connection from some of the municipal areas or from the downtown area to kind of help spur that, that redevelopment and that growth. Because on Long Island, we're limited in redevelopment based upon the health department regulations without sewers. So until we can kind of get sewers everywhere, you may have a downtown that struggles a little bit. Or you have an empty storefront that's always going to be a retail, and you can't get, say, apartments up on 2nd and 3rd floors, or change it to a restaurant use or whatever, or even just a medical office becomes a hard sell sometimes. So I think, part of that is if we can work together as a community between our developers, our county, our municipalities, and kind of come to a mutual agreement, I think there's a lot of good to be had there.
Yeah, I think it's important that people understand that what you propose to use the property for will have a different amount of wastewater flow. It's called design standards from the health department. So I don't want to get too deep into the weeds in that, but if you want a restaurant, they calculate it by seats, how many seats you have in the restaurant. So to make a restaurant successful financially, you need to maximize the number of seats. But at the same time, you're going to have, for every seat, you're going to have a certain amount of flow of wastewater that's calculated by the government, by the health department, and you're going to have to meet the demand of how many seats based on the number of seats you have, the wastewater demand. Same with the medical office. Is a higher demand of generates more wastewater than a regular office. Retail generates the least amount of wastewater flow. So, and we know what's happening with retail these days. Nobody's going to go downtown to buy things. They're staying at home and having it delivered. But hopefully that turns back around, because I think people like the walking downtowns.
Yeah.
And in order to revitalize a downtown, as Bryan is saying, you really need to be connected to sewer, because you can create a much more dense downtown. And I don't mean dense people always give it a negative connotation.
Always, yes.
But I mean, you want to have multiple users using properties, existing buildings. If you can retrofit an existing building, put multiple users in there, put some residential above first floor retail or first floor commercial, because then what you do by doing that, by creating these residential spaces above first floor commercial, you're creating consumers. You're creating people who will be walking on the street and buying the products, or eating in the restaurants, or visiting the retail store, the drugstore, the dry cleaners, the bagel shop, the coffee shop. Those people who live there would rather walk out their front door and walk down the street than go get in their car and drive to a mall. They would rather be there. And I think the younger generation, the next generation, is really latching on to that. I know my kids would much rather go out the door, walk 2 blocks, and get what they want than get in their car and drive somewhere. And, I know my generation, we were more tied to our cars. But I think the next generation, and I talk about this with people sometimes, and, the older people, my friends of mine, they're like, yeah, I don't know, Chris, it'll never happen. People aren't going to give up their cars. And I will say, well, maybe you won't give up your car, but I bet your son or your grandson or your granddaughter or, they're more likely to. They're not opposed to it.
The tide's turning, it's coming, and you guys, you kind of both led into like my next topic, which was the environment and the economy, and you really did a good job of tying it together. But a lot of times people perceive it as being mutually exclusive, when in reality, improvements to the environment, like we were just discussing, are going to improve the economy. How do we convince people that don't necessarily believe that that's the case? I guess sometimes the proof is in the pudding, but just getting to the pudding is tough.
Yeah. So going back again, this started, I would say, in the 1980s. There was a really big push to understand that, at least for the east end of Long Island, the environment was the economy. The reason people go to the east end of Long Island is because they like open space. They like the beach. They like the bay. They want to go out on their boat. They want to go surfing. They want to...
The vineyards, the farms,
the
all
vineyards,
the
the farms. That's what draws them.
Yeah.
Tourism on the east end of Long Island is drawn... The tourism, the positive results or the positive impacts of tourism is directly affected by the environment, because the people like the open space. They like the preserved farmland. They like the vistas. They want to drive down Sound Avenue, or they want to drive down a back road in the Hamptons and not see a lot of development, and they want to be able to go places. But at the same time, they want to be able to go into a nearby downtown area, go to a restaurant, walk around the village of East Hampton, walk around the village of Southampton, go into Sag Harbor and, have a stroll and get something to eat. And that's what people... So the economy on the east end of Long Island is directly tied to the environment. Other places, I think the economy is tied to reuse of existing development. When you get into Nassau County and western Suffolk, you have a lot of development on Route 110, the Route 110 corridor, Melville, where we are today. It's very tied to taking what's already been developed and retrofitting it or redeveloping it for another use. And people have been very good at it. I mean, this is now... Frequently, unfortunately, remediation is required before you reuse it. And remediation is the result of somebody inappropriately discharging something to the ground or bringing something onto the site that shouldn't have been brought onto the site. And then you have somebody coming in who wants to reuse the property, and they can't right away until there's some type of remediation plan so that it can be developed. And depending on the sensitivity of the reuse, I mean, we know if we wanted to put a nursery school or residential, you want that site to be almost pristine. You want to, remediate it to the highest level, because you don't want people to be getting sick from what was there before.
Green fields and brown fields, that's something that PW Grocer we are heavily involved with, and it's something I can really relate to.
Well, I'm trying to lead you right into this.
Oh, you're too good to us, Chris. Thank you.
But no, I'm speaking from experience. Like I said, I've been doing this. I've been involved in this since 1981, and it's a long time. And it's been a lot of progress. And now, when we talked about progress over the last 150 years, it was constantly how to progress the economy, how to grow industry, and what we've gotten better at over the last, I want to say, since 1971. I think that was the first Earth Day. We've gotten into how can you do both? How can you create progress? How can you progress the economy while respecting the environment? And that's what it's about. It's about good planning, developing good technology, how you can do something without having the negative impacts. And I know PW Grocer is right there thinking that through.
We are, and I appreciate that. And that's really what a lot of our podcasts are all about. It's, not so much the promotion but of the firm, but just, getting the word out there that, we've got to take care of this place, this planet, our region, our communities. We only get one shot at this, and the longer we ignore that, the more difficult it's going to be to get back to, a sustainable future. So before I change the subject, because I got definitely a topic I'm dying to talk to you about. Brian, you have anything you want to add on the wastewater aspects, or?
Well, I mean, I think I got a good, maybe a good segue to your next topic, but I'll see. You know, I mean, you talk about that and economy and industry and redevelopment. You know, my mind goes to a spot that Chris knows very well, is the Hauppauge Industrial Park. So there we've got existing, you know, it's an existing industrial area. There was a small sewage treatment plant there. The counties have recently expanded it and is kind of going on and sewering that entire industrial development. Now, again, industrial flows are not always the highest use, but there's a lot of buildings there. I don't know the number of millions of square feet of space over there, but there's a lot of key players in the local Long Island industry. There's a lot of pharmaceuticals, a lot of manufacturing work. We do work for a lot of the tenants in that space. And, you know, there's a drive there to push for sewer infrastructure so those facilities can more readily expand or adapt to new tenants coming into buildings. And they've even gone extra steps. I mean, you know, there's been numerous presentations on how they're connecting solar panels on all the flat roofs out there, that they're trying to, you know, put them in to generate power for themselves or for the grid. I know that's an ongoing discussion and continues to work, and Chris can kind of lead into that a little bit more, but, you know, that's the kind of reuse of what you're looking at and what you have. And rather than, say, put solar farms on empty fields or, you know, vacant lots, you know, you look at things like, you know, could you put them on roofs of buildings, parking lots? I mean, the county went around years ago and put solar on a number of county facilities in the parking lots. You know, you're looking at this impervious open space that we have on the island and saying, well, how can we make it better and make it better for everybody? So I think that kind of, you know, that kind of development and, you know, is what we really need to look at moving forward.
So that's a good thing you brought up. If you mind, I'll segue into that for a minute. The solar carport.
That was what we were going to go right into solar for you. So by all means.
Okay. So that was really the lead on that was the electric company. So they came out with what they called a Feedin Tariff program.
Okay.
So what that was a subsidy that they were willing to provide. They were willing to pay a higher price per kilowatt generated from renewable sources. So it was called a Feedin Tariff. So they had a little add-in so that if you were going to develop, they were really looking to develop renewable generation of power from renewable sources. So the first program was called Feedin Tariff 1 or FIT 1. And they came, we as a county, this was when I was, and you guys probably didn't know this, but when I was the director of real property acquisition and management, we came up with an idea as a county that we could offer land to a company that would want to partner with us to build the solar carports. So we entered into an agreement, and they put in a proposal, and they put up solar carports on county-owned parking lots at train stations and at the county centers in Central Islip and in Riverhead. And we put up, I think it was 7 locations and a bunch of train stations and Deer Park, H. Lee Dennison Building, the North County Complex, County Center, the Central Islip Courthouses. Those are all properties we identified as available parking lots there where you could put up solar carports. And that was a winning bid. They were awarded the bid, and they paid the county rent to rent the land so that they could put up the solar carports. So if you look at it, it was revenue to the county.
It's a win-win.
Revenue to the county.
Yeah.
The solar developer, who people always like say, "Wow, how much are they going to make?" Well, they're taking the risk too. So that's where I kind of when people I kind of look at it from a broad perspective. You have to look at it from all different directions, and that's why I've been in the government, I've been an environmental attorney, I've been a business attorney for people who are trying to make investments. There's ways to do it all where everybody gets a benefit. And that's kind of the strategy that we have to take to protect the environment. You have to give the people who are willing to take the risk and invest in the programs and the development of those types of things that are going to protect the environment, they have to get a return. And if they don't get a return on their investment, they're not going to make the investment. So I frequently go and speak to towns, I present projects, and I try to explain, this is the benefit you've identified that you want. And this is the company that's willing to give you that benefit. But at the same time, they want a return on their investment. So I was very happy that the electric company came in. I think the first Feedin Tariff program was paying 22 cents a kilowatt. It's gotten more and more and more competitive, and I think they're down to the 16. So the solar projects that are being built now are coming in. They pencil. Now you bid it in, and you put a price of what you'll sell the power for. And the companies are now coming in between like 16 and 17 cents. It's less than 17, more than 16. It's in that neighborhood, and it's all based on the developer who's telling what kind of return they need on their investment. The margins are small, and it takes a lot of time to receive your return on investment.
Payback.
Because your upfront is very high, and that's why they need what's called pilot payments, payment in lieu of taxes, because at the beginning it's very hard for them to be financially secure on their project. And over time, they will be able to pay more taxes. So it's not like they're paying more. They're paying 5 times, 6 times, sometimes 10 times more in taxes on that property than was being paid prior to their development. By the end of the project, they're paying 15 times. So they get that little abatement at the beginning, and it increases.
It just keeps escalating, huh?
It keeps escalating. At the end of the project, you're paying a lot of money, and their return goes down because most of these projects lose some of their capacity over time. They become less efficient unless you change out panels and technology, which is also a cost.
More money, right?
Right. So I try to explain this to groups, and when I do go to civic, I get invited to come speak at civic organizations, and they think they're going to attack me and they're going to go after me. But by the end of the night, they're thanking me, and they're telling me, we didn't understand it.
So they're getting the message.
But now we do.
Oh, gosh.
But now we do understand it. And it's important to look at it from everybody's perspective, because we really are, and I know it's a cliche, but we are all in this together.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've said it before in the podcast. It's one planet.
Yes.
Whether or not you think that, it's
So we got to not get rid of them, but we have to be cautious of the over-striving developer who's looking to do more than should be done on a piece of property, who's looking to get more return than they should be. I mean, there's an old expression in the legal field that's very legal technical. Pigs eat, hogs get slaughtered. They teach us that in law school, by the way. That's one of the courses you take. No, but you learn. You got to go for what you can get. I mean, what makes sense. And don't try to get more than that, because you're probably not going to you'll end up with nothing. So if you try to get too much, you get nothing. If you try to get the right amount, if you're willing to listen and to have interaction with communities and with municipalities and understand the impacts of your project and understand what needs to be done to reduce your impacts.
Yeah.
And to take into consideration wastewater and electricity and quality of life, you can have a very successful project. You can get a great rate of return. But you got to understand what impacts you're producing and not have your impacts outweigh the benefits.
I mean, do you ever get involved with selling the project on it's getting us off the fossil fuels and the greenhouse gas emissions and lowering the carbon footprint, whether it's for the county or for whoever?
Yeah, it's funny. I've done quite a few projects, and mostly ground mounted. I have done some rooftop solar, and I will get into that in a minute with the HIA, because I think it's a great project.
Yeah.
And they're trying to utilize something called community solar, which is where people buy in and you develop it not on your property, but you're an investor basically, and you get the partial benefit of the community solar project. And it makes a great sense, makes great common sense, because you build the project where it belongs, and then you have everybody participate from the benefit side, and it's multi-benefits. You get the financial benefit as being an investor in the community solar project, or a participant, or a subscriber. There's a name for it. Sometimes I'm really good on the concept, but not so good on the what's the latest vocabulary on some of these projects. But I'm really good on the concept of it, the policy behind it. But that's what's going on. HIA, they are putting it on rooftops. Some are strictly for that property owner's use and that property owner's benefit. There's also going to be the opportunity to do community solar where multiple property owners can benefit. You can build the project where it belongs, and there are a number of companies. The Sun Nation is one of them that I know is working a lot in HIA. So this can happen, and just again, people with a little bit of an idea, way to structure it so that they benefit financially from it, but at the same time, there's tremendous benefit to the people who are receiving it, and there's tremendous benefit to the community. And as a way to structure almost any project, any proposal, where you realize what could be done and not have too much impact upon the community where it's being done.
That was my last question I was going to ask. Are you seeing companies and corporations, taking a greater role in this climate-friendly infrastructure? And that was a great example with the HIA.
Yes, they're doing a tremendous job of doing environmentally sound infrastructure, and at the same time benefiting them financially, and also benefiting our whole region because it's going to reduce our reliance, our dependence on fossil fuel plants.
Are you seeing any other projects like that regionally? Nassau, Suffolk, East End, anything?
Well, the ground-mounted projects on industrial land, I think work. If there was some preference given or benefit given to companies who are willing to add an environmental component to their project, some type of a leader or whatever you want to call it, if you gave them some type of a preference or some type of a kicker that allowed them even more than what they might have gotten otherwise, but at the same time, they were being very environmentally sound. I mean, we do that with green roofs now, and we do it with LEED certification buildings, and we do it with toilets that have less water flow. These are all things that when you add them all together and you could build a project which really has less impact, it could be analyzed more on its impact than on its how many units you have, or how tall is your building, or if we could get away from we're analyzing everything on a square foot basis and getting more into, okay, they're willing to incorporate into their project all of these environmentally sound components. And I think you should be able to get more density as a result. But we're getting there. I think we're getting there. I think the IA systems is a good start. Because you're not going to be able to sewer. Let's go back to it. You're not going to be able to sewer every place in Suffolk County.
It would be next to impossible.
I know.
I agree.
And I don't think we'd want to, because
the cost and just the infrastructure to do so, it's almost unattainable.
Well, if it started when you lay the sewer pipe to get the return on the investment of the sewer pipe, you're going to want more people to connect, which means more development.
Yep.
So there are places where you don't want to do that. You want to leave it where you have a sanitary system, and then you have a mile away another sanitary. I mean, there's
places like Shelter Island, which they are partially sewered, but if we proposed running a sewer pipe over to Shelter Island, it would never happen.
So there's ways to address that, though, and it's all comes from smart people, engineers, architects, people who design, people who do site plan layouts, people who do infrastructure, sanitary system detail on plans. There's ways to minimize the impact of a project and allow the project to move forward without a detriment to any community. But it takes dialogue. It takes thoughtful people on both sides. More than both, on all sides. Okay? And you can end up with a really good project. Also, what I try to put out to communities is, where are the next jobs coming from? You got kids who are growing up and they want to stay here and they want to work and they want to live here, but they want to do certain things. It's funny, and the next, I don't know if we want to call them millennials, but they're very, which I like, they want the quality of life. I mean, the generation before me was about sacrifice, about working hard for your kids, for your family, to make the money. And support people, and you would do anything. Okay, you'd work 2 jobs, 3 jobs. People are getting away from that a little bit, I think, and in a good way. I'm not, I'm still unfortunately tied to this. I got to work a lot of hours because I have a lot of people that I got to support and help. And I think the younger generation, for all the right reasons, is saying, "Hey, wait a minute, I don't want to work that much. I don't want to work. I don't want to live to work. I want to just work so that I can live my life." And we need to find those right jobs. We need to have the jobs that, that fit what we want to do. And I think there's going to be a lot of opportunities if we continue to progress the way we're progressing, where you're identifying what technologies can be done, get people involved in working on those thoughts. You need thought leaders to move this forward. And getting people doing the right things, I think there's hope for our planet.
I agree. I like the optimism. Before we close, I just want to go off the menu here a little bit, and because you've been very insightful. The solar stuff, that was mind blowing. I really enjoyed hearing about that Hauppauge Industrials. I didn't know about that.
Yeah.
But there's a couple of big wind projects on the horizon for Long Island. Are you involved in any of those?
No pun intended on the horizon, right? You didn't mean
No, you caught me. But yeah, it's and I've been talking to a couple of people. I was at the League of Conservation Voters Gala the other night, and obviously it's a lot of big energy companies and sustainability, and there's a lot of talk about it, a lot of chatter, and where they're going to land these cables and things like that. Have you had any involvement with any of that stuff, or any thoughts on it?
We as a firm have been representing 2 of the big offshore wind projects. My involvement has been more on the where are we going to locate the easements for the underground cables.
Yep.
I do know some about I know some of the places. I don't know if I should be discussing it because there are some towns that are opposing the idea.
I don't want to
Yeah, we're familiar, Chris. I know which ones you're probably talking about.
Yeah.
Right. And it's funny, it's the same town that was the first one to adopt the resolution about how they were going to reduce their carbon footprint, and they were going to be 100% self-sustaining with renewable energy, who's done nothing for renewable energy to this point. And where other towns like Riverhead that has allowed tremendous amount of solar to be developed, they're probably, and I don't know the facts on this, I don't have it any written down, but they're going to be somewhere around 100 megawatts of solar generation in their town. And it's funny because people are trying to, I would be shouting that from the rooftops, no pun intended on the solar rooftop.
Yeah, there we go again.
But I would be out there saying we are the most, they might be one of the, maybe the highest town in the state of New York for generation of power from solar. And I think they should be patting themselves on the back and taking all the kudos they could.
Be an example for others. Yeah,
I would be inviting the leaders of the state to come down and give them an award, because if anybody followed the clean energy study recommendations, I think Riverhead was one of the first to follow it. Now I know we have tremendous wind projects upstate New York.
Yep.
And I've been to those because I represented the company when they came down here. They were looking to, and they showed me their projects upstate. Was it Loudonville or somewhere up there in upstate New York, North Country as I call it. So as far as the wind projects here, Long Island is a little more concerned about what they see than what they get, unfortunately, when it comes to wind. And they don't want to see the wind, so it's very far offshore.
Yeah.
And but it's going to be brought in by a submarine cable, and it's going to hit land, and then it's going to have to travel underground for the most part. I know some places will allow overhead, but most people want it underground, and it's going to reach a substation at some point. And again, I don't want to get into too much of the details because there's some meetings and litigation.
Yeah, there's still a long way to go to work it out, but I'm actually excited about it. The offshore, I'm in the same group. I really don't want to see it. I'm a surfer. I love the beach. I'm always down there. How would that affect my whole, I see these great big spinning turbines, but I've got to realize, just like I said in a previous podcast, I drive a big jacked up truck that, Hemi engine spewing all sorts of carbon emissions. Eventually I got to go electric one of these years, right?
Yes.
And it's going to be a hard sell, but it's the same thing with offshore wind. It's a hard sell, but we got to get there.
Yeah, it's got to be one of the. It's funny. Somebody at one time, and I'm not going to go into names because people get I don't know. I don't want them to misunderstand me. Somebody said, "Are you more in favor of solar, wind farms, battery storage?" And the answer was all of the above.
All right.
Because we do need it. We need to be sensible. We need to tie battery storage to solar generation. We need to, create so that you could store it during peak demand during off peak and have it available during peak demand. It's important, and we just got to make sure everybody understands it. And there's some people who will never be in favor of it. They want to be tied to fossil fuels, and they want to say, I don't want to change what I've relied upon for the last 50 years, and we'll never get there, and we'll never be able to do this, and it'll be so expensive. Well, it'll be a lot more expensive to fix the ozone layer.
Without a doubt, if it's fixable, right?
Yes.
Hopefully we can undo what we've done, as I said, the sins of the past.
Yeah.
Chris, I want to thank you. Bryan, Chris, do you guys have any closing thoughts before we wrap up the podcast today?
No, I think one thing that Chris touched on that I think we see in our field is, again, this kind of mutual understanding of the environment and development, and we see it a lot with some of our newer clients for site plans and SECRAs. And while we're working through these processes, we have clients coming to us saying, "Okay, we'll put solar on the roof. We're going to put in a treatment plant when maybe we don't necessarily have to." So they're taking that step, and they're actively working on mitigation measures. And again, that ties into a lot of what Chris is saying, with solar panels and battery backup. And, I listen to my father, who works for the electric company, talk about, distribution of electric over summer peak periods and how every once in a while they get close. And, the more we can have here so that you have redundancy and you have some stuff where your peak load is picked up by batteries generated from solar rather than firing up an old World War II diesel generator, is a good thing, and I think that's something that's really going to kind of push us forward on Long Island. I think we need to look at it more and kind of keep that going, because again, as Chris said, the education, even on the public side, when you're speaking at planning board events and talking to the community and environmental groups, we're starting to find more common ground now. It's no longer really an us versus them. It's how do you make it better? How do you tweak it just a little bit to get it that extra 10% better? It's not adversarial anymore. It's kind of more of a, here's what we're thinking. Is there any way we can make this a little better? And everybody seems to get along and understands it now. And there's less questioning of, well, is that really going to work? They know it works, and you have the backup for it. So I think that's a big driver moving forward for us.
Yeah, bringing up those peaker plants is kind of like when you start up your Hemi truck.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Paul, I'm not attacking you.
No, I'm attacking myself. Eventually I got to come to grips with it.
Those peaker plants have got to go.
Yeah, so does my truck, huh? Oh, God. Well, guys, I do want to thank you again. We had Chris Kent from Farrell Fritz, a partner at the law firm, and Bryan Grogan from PWGC. Today's topic, again, was legal perspectives on the environment. I hope our listeners, you guys, found it as fascinating and enjoyable as I did. Again, I am Paul Boyce, CEO and President of PWGC, the host of PWGC's Environmental Echo. I do thank you again for listening, and if you guys have any questions, comments, or thoughts that you want to share with us, please reach out to us at pwgrocer.com/podcast, and we'll be sure to get back to you. Or if you have topics you want to talk about for upcoming podcasts or potential guests, we're always open to listen. And I do thank you for your time today, and I hope you enjoyed it. Take care.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.